Hello, and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Matt Lateplo, and on behalf of OTC Markets, as well as our co-host, Zach Small Cap Research, we're very pleased you have joined us for our next live presentation from ACHV Life Sciences, Inc. Please note you can submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome the next presenters. John Vandermosten, CFA, Senior Biotechnology Analyst with Zacks Small Cap Research, and John Bensich, CEO of ACHV Life Sciences, Inc., which trades on NASDAQ under the symbol ACHV. Welcome back, John and John.
Thank you so much. And, ACHV Life Sciences has completed 2 phase 3 registrational studies for cytisinicline in smoking cessation. And in a pre-NDA meeting, the company and the FDA agreed to conduct a long-term safety study. We've got the CEO of ACHV, John Bensich, here with us to share the details of this and the company's recent capital raise. Good afternoon, John.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. And can we start out with a short summary of what ACHV is all about, and then we'll talk about some of the other news.
Yeah, sounds great. ACHV Life Sciences is focused on the development of a drug called cytisinicline as an aid to smoking cessation and treatment for nicotine addiction. And it's a bit of an unusual compound because this is a drug that has a rich history of in-market experience. It's a drug that's been on the market in Eastern Europe for more than 20 years. It's had the opportunity to help over 20 million patients during that time frame. But it was also a drug that was likely never going to make it to the US or any major markets. The originators of the compound, their markets are exclusively focused to the East. And so that was the opportunity that we identified, and we were able to secure an exclusive license and supply agreement to the compound to effectively bring the drug out of obscurity with the focus of bringing it first and foremost to the US market. So we have exclusive global rights outside of 17 countries, predominantly in Eastern Europe, where the product is currently sold today. And I think, as you mentioned in your lead-in, since we filed an IND here in the US, we've completed a phase 2 trial where we modified the dose and administration, and more recently completed 2 pivotal phase 3 trials that really set the stage for moving this product forward.
Great. Yeah. And as you mentioned, those were the ORCA trials, and you've completed 2 for smoking, and including that 1 phase 2. And then also you've done some work in vaping. What do we find in terms of safety and efficacy from these 3 latest studies?
Yeah. So when we look at the results here, what we've seen is really strong tolerability. We've seen predominantly single-digit rates of adverse events, no serious treatment-related AEs to note. And we think that compares really favorably to what's available on the market. In particular, drugs like bupropion and varenicline that have a history of black box warnings that are around the products that have really limited some of the utilization. So we think the tolerability is really a key differentiator for us that should ultimately lead to better compliance for patients, and then downstream better outcomes. And in terms of the outcomes, that's exactly what we've seen. We've seen really robust efficacy, looks to be best in class from an odds ratio perspective. So odds ratio is really the likelihood of a patient quitting on our drug versus placebo. When we look at the landscape today, odds ratios are generally in the 2 to 3 range. And what we found in our ORCA development program is odds ratios between 4 and 6, which is really unprecedented in this category, and what at the moment continues to be a more refractory group of nicotine users that have tried and failed on multiple occasions. And then the final piece that we've now validated is a shorter course of therapy at 6 weeks. So the products on the market today are all indicated for 12 weeks administration. So at 6 weeks, that's half the duration, but with the ability to carry on for an incremental 6 weeks. So from a patient perspective, it allows someone maybe not to have that longer term commitment of 3 months, but still knowing that they're going to get a medication that can work for them. So we think kind of the combination of efficacy, of safety, as well as the shorter duration is really the differentiating factors that we found with cytisinicline.
Yes, and it seems pretty supportive of an NDA application. And on that topic, you held a pre-NDA meeting with the FDA late last year, and conversations about what would be needed to submit your NDA. And why don't you share with us some of the details from that meeting, and also catch us up with the most recent news from a week ago concerning
Yeah,
the ORCA OL trial.
Yeah, so an update on the regulatory front. So, as you noted, we held a pre-NDA meeting late last year with the FDA as really the final stop before moving forward with an NDA. And what we heard was, we have all the data that's needed to file from an efficacy perspective, but the agency did request additional exposure data beyond 12 weeks, which really was a surprise to us. And so we really looked at trying to get clarity on what exactly the agency was looking for as part of that pre-NDA meeting, but just weren't able to get that clarity. So we had a follow-up meeting that just occurred with the agency that we announced last week. And the questions were really twofold. One, what is the data set that the agency is looking for that will quell this concern? And the second is, how would we integrate that data into an NDA submission? And we're able to get clarity on both of those. So in reverse order, in terms of how this would get submitted into the NDA, what we agreed to is that we would file the NDA when we have 300 subjects that have been cumulatively exposed for 6 months on the product, and that prior to approval, we would include 100 subjects that have been cumulatively exposed up to 1 year. So, we got a bit of flexibility from the agency in not needing the entire data set at time of NDA submission. And of course, we interrogated kind of other opportunities of, maybe a skinny label or a phase 4 commitment, and unfortunately, we will have to do a bit more work to generate this data, but we've got a clear steer on how we're going to go about doing that, which is an open label trial that we're calling ORCA OL.
Open label.
Open label, exactly. And so, we'll be looking at, and this was based on encouragement from the FDA, which was to bring back subjects from the prior ORCA studies. We've got over 1,700 as part of the 2 phase 3 trials, as well as the vaping study, over 1,100 that have seen between 6 and 12 weeks of therapy as part of those studies. And so we'll be looking to bring back those subjects to get incremental treatment. And I think it's important to note the agency is, again, looking for cumulative data. So if a subject has seen the drug a year ago or 3 years ago, that will all be additive to new exposure today. So we think, generating that 6-month data can be done relatively quickly. And then, we'll need to get at least 100 tracking all the way out to 1 year. But that trial has been designed, and we got FDA's input on that study that we'll be looking to initiate here in the second quarter of this year.
Now, by my math, I think for some of those subjects that had already done 12 weeks of cytisinicline, they probably only need about 14 more, or maybe a little bit less than that, to satisfy that 6-month requirement. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the focus, at least on our end, would be, getting folks that have already seen 12 weeks of treatment back into the clinic is a priority. Behind those would be those that saw 6 weeks, and then behind that would be those that were on placebo. And again, that's going to be the sequence. I think, different than a typical clinical study where you don't have any idea who your subjects are. In this case, we know exactly who they are. And we'll be working with the same centers that were involved in these studies previously. So we think, we'll be able to enroll relatively quickly. I mentioned we plan to initiate this study in the second quarter of this year. The main gate will be just getting drug product packaged and available for clinic use. We've got tablets. We just didn't have any blister packs remaining from the studies we completed last year. So that's on track. We'll get the study initiated in the second quarter. Enrollment should be swifter than what we've seen previously, again, because we know who the subjects are already. It's just a matter of engaging with them and getting those interested lined up to get back into the clinic. So we'd anticipate enrollment to be completed swiftly. And I think being in a position, depending on the mix of subjects we get back and their prior exposure, but being in a position ideally to have that 6-month data generated in the clinic, perhaps by the end of this year. That will need to be monitored, packaged up into a clinical study report and folded into the NDA. But we'd be guiding to NDA submission first half of 2025, and we'll be able to refine that guidance as we get further into the enrollment of this study.
Okay. And then, just for investors, I guess if it takes, 60 days, 30 to 60 days for the FDA to accept it, and then perhaps 10 months for them to review it, that could bring us out somewhere maybe in the early 2026, I guess, for a PDUFA date or a target action date. Does that sound about right?
Correct. Yeah. So first half of 2026. And obviously, as we get more clarity on actual submission timing, we'll be able to refine that as well.
Okay. And I also wanted to accentuate the way that you're going to be able to integrate these two parallel things, the OL trial and then also the NDA submission, because you're going to submit the 6-month data with the NDA, and then prior to clearance or approval, you're going to submit the year-long data. Is that right?
That's correct. So we'll have that at least a minimum of 300 subjects treated for 6 months included in the NDA submission package. There are mechanisms during the NDA review cycle to submit additional data points. There's a 120-day safety update, that will have an opportunity to provide additional data. And we think in all likelihood, most of that longer-term 1-year data would likely be included in that submission that's already built into a standard NDA review period. So I think we've got a pretty good steer on what's required based on that clarity from the agency, and now we just need to get to work and get back into the clinic and start generating the required data.
Got it. And along with the announcement for the ORCA OL trial, you also conducted a capital raise, which I think you've completed by now, and the cash is in the bank. And that actually has another interesting structure. You get some now, and then some later following NDA submission. Why don't you tell us how that's structured, and how far does that get you? Does that help you complete the complete trial and submit, or do you need more? How is that structured?
Yeah, so we announced last week $124 million financing with $60 million of that coming up front. So that has now closed. That is in the bank, and really fuels the open label trial. And the genesis was, to make sure we've got sufficient funds to get through that study. And with, runway, a minimum of 6 months or more runway beyond NDA acceptance. So again, as you noted, once you file, there's a 2-month window before the FDA will accept, and making sure that we've got kind of sufficient runway on the other side of that, just in case there are any things that come up in the clinic in terms of timing shifts. So that's in the bank. That gives us a clear steer driving this forward with cash runway into late 2025. And then the other tranche with respect to this financing was based on a performance milestone. So effectively, it's a warrant. These would typically be, 3 or 5 year warrants with no real impetus to convert into an exercise. In this case, within 30 days of FDA accepting our NDA application, the warrant holders would have 30 days to exercise, or the warrants would disappear. So, we think it's either generating capital that drives us all the way through approval, or that overhang disappears. So, we thought this was an attractive structure. And as we named in the release, we've got some great new long-term fundamental biotech focused investors that were very supportive of the story going forward.
Right, and I think even your supplier, So Pharma, was an investor as well, which shows their level of confidence.
Absolutely, right. I mean, this is going to be a huge commercial opportunity for them. They're going to make significantly more money selling through to us in our markets than they ever have in the smaller Eastern European markets. So it was a great vote of confidence and support from So Pharma to see this continue to drive forward to market.
And you also had some other good news on the financing side. You were able to extend your loans as well. How far do they go, and do you think that this relieves any need for additional adjustments on that side?
Yeah, so we do have an outstanding loan with Silicon Valley Bank that was set to mature this year. And so, in combination with the capital raise we did last week, we signed a non binding term sheet to extend that to December of 2025. So, really kind of beyond NDA submission and acceptance, and well in advance of when we'd get additional capital from those milestone warrants. So that
Mm-hmm.
was again a vote of support from the bank that again they see the value in this asset and were willing to work with us to get that extended. We're now just in the final throes of finalizing that amendment and hope to get that completed here shortly.
Very good. And one thing I wanted to point out was, in our role as analysts that cover Achieve Life Sciences, we point to Chantix a lot as a good guide to what could happen here. But we note the $1 billion in revenues that was able to peak at before the patent ran out. But the nicotine addiction market has changed a lot since that was approved back in 2006. We've had a lot of population growth. We've had vaping, which has really taken off, and also I think another point that John has made and that we have reiterated was that 75% of the Chantix market was in the United States, but there are a huge number of smokers in China and other places in the world that don't yet have this product. So what do you see as the incremental opportunity now compared to almost 20 years ago for what seems to be a better smoking cessation product or nicotine addiction product?
Yeah, so I mean the market continues to be enormous. There's over 1.3 billion tobacco users around the globe, over a billion smokers. So the market continues to be there for a product like this. The U.S. just given kind of market access and reimbursement, is going to continue to be, I would say, the lion's share of the opportunity, which is why we're focused here on the U.S. first and foremost. But we see significant global expansion opportunities. China being very high on the list, and I think Asia in general. But China in particular, with over 300 million smokers in that country, and I think historically it hasn't really been primed for people looking to quit. It's very ingrained in the culture in terms of the smoking habits there. But that's slowly starting to change. We're seeing kind of smoking bans in public places, things like that. And of course, a lot of this is going to be driven by the downstream healthcare costs coming from those products. And so I think the opportunity there is significantly larger than what it ever was during the Chantix run here over the last 2 decades. So yeah, I think globally huge opportunity, and I think the big expansion opportunity is really the advent of the e-cigarette market. This is a market that's come up from really nothing 2 decades ago to over 11 million adult users here in the U.S. and even over 80 million globally, I think, from some recent reports. And I would anticipate that market to continue to grow. I mean, it's up 20% year over year. This is where large tobacco is redirecting a lot of their marketing dollars to promote these reduced risk products, as they're calling them. And we know those folks, want to quit, are looking for reasons to quit. And we think we've got the right solution to help there. So we see that as a real opportunity to expand where the market has been historically for smoking cessation products.
Yeah, vaping. I mean, I think a lot of people think that vaping is safe, but you're still addicted to an addictive drug. And then it uses propylene glycol and a bunch of other chemicals in there, which, I don't know how many studies have been done on those particularly, but when you heat a substance, it can create negative things that don't show up for a long time. So I think there's a lot of arguments to suggest that maybe vaping cessation is a good thing to pursue as well. I wanted to ask one question before I move into the audience questions, just about M&A. We try to look at that pretty closely because that's the exit strategy for a lot of the smaller companies like yourselves. And it's been up pretty strongly so far in 2024. I looked at January and February, and it was up in dollar terms anyway, by 89%. And my conversations with CEOs in general have found that there are a lot more conversations going on between big pharma and smaller names. So, John, what have you seen out there? And has the announcement of this trial changed anything in terms of your discussions? And what do you see happening in terms of that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, the overall M&A markets have picked up, as you noted. I think we started seeing this really kind of second half of last year, but has really picked up steam even further beginning of 2024. And I would anticipate that to continue as we drive ahead. And I think there's just such a significant loss of exclusivity cliffs coming over the next 2, 3,
Right.
4 years from pharma that they need to replace revenues. And I think the other piece that's really been catching fire behind is the advent of the GLP-1s for obesity, as well as additional depression drugs, that are largely being driven by primary care call points. So I think what has been a category that maybe has been less attractive historically, I think is coming back full circle. There's going to be distribution needs for these sorts of products, and we're seeing more, I would say, on the large biotech side now reinvesting in primary care. So I think for us, that leads to more opportunities. We've seen additional companies come out of the woodwork to have commercial discussions even after the announcement late last year on additional clarity needed from the FDA. So I think that bodes well for us long term, and I think we haven't seen anybody drop out of any of our discussions related to the recent developments. So I think we're as optimistic as we have been, and I think as we've discussed, I think we continue to believe that this product, in terms of maximizing the revenue potential, is going to be best served in the hands of pharma or a very large biotech group that has a global platform for distribution of this product.
Definitely. Well, it looks like we kind of answered one of the audience questions that came up about the M&A and if the recent interaction with the FDA was going to delay anything. And I think you addressed that. There's another question on here on the size and competitiveness of the smoking cessation market. Who else is out there? How big are they, and how competitive are they with their products?
Yeah, so if we look at the market today, we've got effectively 7 products that are available. So, Chantix or varenicline, again, has been kind of the most successful, but also the most notorious in terms of the challenges with tolerability. You've got 5 different nicotine replacement therapy products. Again, nicotine in another form, so tolerability is great, but efficacy leaves a bit to be desired. And then the only other product, an oral therapeutic called bupropion, is a repurposed depression drug, also known as Wellbutrin for depression. But it comes with kind of poor tolerability and lower efficacy. Now, all of these products today are now all generic. So I think from a competition perspective, we would anticipate being the only voice out on the street with a branded product. And, as I kind of teed off this call, we see a real opportunity with cytisinicline to really promote based on strong tolerability and strong efficacy. And that's, a combination that you just don't see available today. So we think that's really going to resonate in this setting. This market is enormous. There's, I think, nearly 8 million smoking cessation scripts being written annually in the U.S. And I think from the work we've done with, physicians as well as potential patients, we think we can get a substantial share of that, just given the profile.
I wanted to touch on the vaping program and kind of the pathway forward for that. Obviously the smoking cessation program is going to clear the way and make it easier for the vaping program. But what is next for that? Assuming we stick to this timeline that we discussed for smoking cessation, what could the timeline look like for vaping, and what would the incremental effort be to get that to approval as well?
Yeah, so last year we had successful results from the first ever double-blind placebo-controlled trial for vaping cessation, our ORCA V1 study. So, we've now got those results, packaged up together. We are in the process of getting those presented and published this year. So more to come on that. But I think the key driving force on our side will be to hold an end of phase 2 meeting with FDA this year to understand what the next steps are to open up for a broader nicotine addiction or vaping cessation indication. So that will clear this year. Our belief has been that a single phase 3 trial is what would be required for approval, and that we'd be able to leverage all the work we've done on the smoking cessation side as supportive data, and that ORCA V1 would be one of those 2 well-controlled studies for approval. So we'll look to get that clarity this year to really chart the path of where we head as a next step.
Okay. So you think, could it be 1 year behind the smoking cessation label?
Yeah, I think once we get that clarity, we'll be able to assess what the next steps are. But I think kind of revisiting where we've been historically with, timelines of running a phase 3 trial, I think that's a pretty good estimate of what might be possible.
Okay. And let's explore a little bit the success of some of the you mentioned 8 million scripts out there, so there's still a lot of demand for product for smoking cessation. What do you think is going on in that market, and is there still a lot of kind of unsatisfied demand for smoking cessation products? John, I think, did we lose you, or did we lose me? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I thought we just a minute on just how the generic scripts have looked for varenicline out there. We had one company, Endo, that was selling them, and they now there's a few more competitors out there. What is the trend? What do the trends in the generic market suggest for cytisinicline?
Yeah, so a little bit unusual in terms of the last product to go generic, with Chantix being withdrawn from the market in the first half of 2021. Endo launched the first generic that fall. I think we've put out in some of our work, they sold north of 300 million in generic varenicline in 2022. We've seen IQVIA reports here most recently suggesting the generic varenicline run rate commercially in the U.S. Is roughly 450 million. And from what we've seen, that's at a 30 to 40% discount to where the brand was. So the scripts are now approaching 80+% of where branded Chantix left off. But unlike a typical generic market where with the price drop you would see perhaps more utilization, we're just not seeing that. So again, it is somewhat hindered by the history, having a boxed warning for nearly 8 years, also having, poor tolerability overall. It is a generally disliked product. So we see a real opportunity not only to take from varenicline market share, from what we've heard from prescribers is that they would also, dial back some of their prescriptions for nicotine replacement therapy and bupropion. So we see a real opportunity again to really prove this out based on strong tolerability and strong efficacy to perhaps become the gold standard on the other side of approval. Once this has a chance to really get out and really treat folks in this setting that haven't seen anything new in almost 2 decades.
Correct. Well, I want to mention that John is available for one-on-one meetings before he signs us out with some parting thoughts. John, any parting messages to the viewers for today's interview?
Sure. Yeah. I just want to say, we've got the clarity that we needed, so we're, working quickly to drive forward with the open label trial and march this thing forward to an NDA submission first half of next year. And with the financing we did last week, we are now in the best capitalized position that we've ever been. So really with the capital on hand to drive this ahead, really puts us in a unique position going forward. So, really excited about where we're at and look forward to bringing additional updates to everyone as we proceed.
All right, great. Thank you, John. And it was great to speak.